Well, good morning. Hope you're all well, and thank you very much for joining me this morning. Um, this is a session that I run a few times on behalf of Lexon Corporate Services, and just discussing some best practice in employment investigations or HR or workplace investigations. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about independent reviews. So as I said, it'll be recorded and be available to you after. So we're just going to go through some things. There are some videos, and I do apologise that the sound quality may not be great, but I will do my best to make sure you can hear everything okay, and you get everything you need. So I will just start by bear with me. So let's talk about today's agenda. So as I said, I'll do a little introduction about me and about Lexon Corporate Services and what we do. I'll then talk about investigations. That's going to be the biggest part of today's session. I'm going to talk about investigations, some best practice and some background. And as I said, maybe hopefully show you some videos. And then I'm going to just briefly touch on something that we term as independent reviews and give you some background as to why they're an option rather than a more formal investigation process. So a little bit about me. My name's Gary Rogers. I'm head of investigations here at Lexon. Unfortunately, I've been doing investigations for over 30 years in various different guises. I started in private security. I worked as a fraud investigator with the civil service. I spent a short time in the Metropolitan Police, and I spent over 20 years in Transport for London in various roles, conducting investigations, primarily around staff misconduct and fraud and serious gross misconduct. But I also was an accredited and designated bullying and harassment investigator, chaired numerous disciplinary hearings. I'm a member of the World Association of Professional Investigators and the Association of Corporate Investigators, and I do some volunteer work. So I'm an independent person, which means I sit on a number of local authorities investigating complaints against elected members. And I also volunteer for an organisation called Locate International, which looks at investigating cold cases of missing people. So a little bit about me and why I'm sort of sharing some of those experiences with you today. So just a little statistic, and this is a little bit out of date, but I think it's still relevant. So according to CIPD, in a survey and a report they published back in January 2020, I think it was, almost employees are almost twice as likely, twice as likely, forgive me. Sorry, I'm just bringing people into the session. So yeah, people, just on that previous slide, people are more than twice as likely to experience bullying than harassment, and only 4% of your workforce report sexual harassment, which is quite interesting, I think, because I don't know about anyone who's present here today, but I've actually conducted more sexual harassment and assault complaints recently, than a number. So there's a shift, but 4%. If you think of a workforce of 1,000, that's 40 people. It's still a high number. So that's why it's important that workplace investigations are conducted correctly. And I love this quote from Albert Einstein. I use it quite a lot. And essentially, for me, what this means is, unless you investigate, you have no idea of what's taken place. You don't know, and to do so, and this has happened recently. I'll give you an example recently where a complaint, funny enough, as I said, it was sexual assault, and immediately there's this knee-jerk reaction of, right, well, we need to suspend the person. We need to this person can't work for us anymore. Haven't done an investigation. We don't know what the facts are. We don't know what the evidence is. We don't know what the allegations are even. So to condemn someone without doing an investigation, as Einstein says here, I said it's my favorite thing, is the highest form of ignorance. Okay. So I'm just going to share this really here, particularly in the UK, solely in the UK, really, the Arbitration and Conciliation Advisory Service, ACAS. Now, the reason I use ACAS is essentially if you follow ACAS guidance and best practice and code of practice, you're not going to go far wrong if your case ends up at an employment tribunal, okay? Because these are the standards that the tribunal panel are going to be looking to. So this particular standard is a guidance on conducting workplace investigations, and it clearly sets out what an investigation is. And for me, and I'm not going to read this because obviously you can see this, but for me the last part is really important. That last paragraph, which is about making a decision without completing a reasonable investigation, can make any decisions thereafter potentially unfair. Okay, what that means is that if you're making those decisions without conducting an investigation, and a reasonable investigation, fair, thorough, okay, if the individual involved decides to take that to an employment tribunal, potentially you could be facing an unfair dismissal claim. Okay, now I've talked about this on a number of occasions, but what we need to consider is that some people take that sort of, oh, well, we'll fight our case. But actually, it's not just the financial damage to the organisation you've got to consider. It's the reputational damage to your organisation. Okay. And I've done a number of webinars and just posted one on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, and I gave examples, recent examples, where it was in the press. It's actually in the press. This organisation did this. You may have seen, unfortunately, a lot of criticism about a healthcare provider in the UK around, that their poor investigation practices, or their, dismissing people unfairly, and it all adds to this reputational damage for your organisation. So actually, for your reputation as well as for your financial positioning, it makes more sense to conduct a reasonable investigation and to conduct an investigation, excuse me, than to not. And this guidance is a real key indicator. Follow this, you can't go wrong. What is the role of an investigator? And this is something I think gets often confused in workplace investigations, if I'm honest with you. I think from my own experience, there's a considerable amount of pressure, particularly at a senior level, when an investigator has been appointed, like a peer pressure. And I think at times you've got to be clear that as an investigator, your role is to conduct a fair and objective investigation, okay, and reach a conclusion on what did or did not happen. And I'm going to give an example, a little test of something around that later on. You're going to be looking at evidence that supports the complaint, but you're also looking to see if there's evidence that refutes it. So essentially, you're not there to prove guilt. You are there to establish, do the facts substantiate or refute the complaint that has been made? And in terms of a disciplinary matter, okay, it's not your role to prove guilt at all. It's just, is there a case to answer? And that's based on the evidence that you have available. And this is another aspect around evidence and what is commonly referred to, particularly in workplace investigations, as the burden of proof, as the balance of probabilities. And again, I'll be discussing that with you. So that's clearly what your role is as an investigator. It's about being impartial. It's about not allowing external influences direct your decision making or direct the course you wish to take in the investigation. So I'm just going to wait for this slide. I'm going to show you this short video. Now, this is really old. You can see this is from 1987, but I think it really does highlight what an investigator should be looking to do. I hope everyone saw that, was able to see that and hear that. Now, this is actually a short clip from, as you can see, from the 80s, and it's actually about a leading newspaper, about the content of the newspaper. But actually, I think it's really good. It demonstrates, as an investigator, you're not looking at this from one side of a story. Okay, you're looking at every aspect of what took place when it comes to the complaint you're investigating. Okay, every aspect. And as you can see here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a bias in particular. If you only see one side of a story, you're going to make a decision that may not necessarily be the case. So as an investigator, it's really important you're open. Okay, you're open to the information available. You're not prejudging. So I'm just going to say something now. This is part of a psychological research, and it was around how we perceive people. And what they found was that it takes around a tenth of a second, okay, for an individual, for us people, to make a judgment about a stranger from the first moment we see their face. So to put that into context, when my camera came on and you all joined this meeting, in a tenth of a second, you'd made a judgment about me. Now, usually I get, especially with my accent, usually I get that I'm some sort of West Ham supporter, or but you'll have made judgments about my background, my education, whether you like me or not, whether you believe me or not, all those things, a tenth of a second. And actually, the longer you've seen me and the longer I've been talking and we've been interacting, your initial impression is not going to have changed a great deal. So taking that into context, it shows that no matter who we are as individuals, we make very quick decisions about people. Now, when you're an investigator, as we've just seen from that clip earlier, that's actually, you've got to be counterintuitive. That's not what you should be doing. You should not be making that initial judgment, or you certainly should not allow it to influence the way you interact with that person and what you believe that person to be or is telling you at a point you're conducting an interview. And the same can be said for the person that you're interviewing. Remember, tenth of a second, they've made a decision about you. And that's why building a rapport with the person you're interviewing is key. It's about building a relationship, because actually what you want is that individual to trust you enough to be open and honest with you, because ultimately your aim as an investigator is to get as much information from that individual as possible. Don't assume. Okay. I think that's what I'm really trying to emphasize here. Don't assume. You know, just explained how quickly you can make a decision based on your own perceptions and bias, and as an investigator, that's not what you should be doing. You need to be counterintuitive. You need to train yourself not to do those things, or recognize them, put them aside, and not allow them to influence the way you interact, the way you review evidence or information you've received, the way you interview people or perceive the information they're telling you. Don't assume as an investigator. And I use this because this is quite interesting. So this is Professor Mehrabian's elements of communication. So essentially, this was some research, and a number of you are probably already aware of this. Um, this is around research of how we communicate with individuals and what messages we receive as part of that communication. And interestingly, you'll see here, only 7% of the information that we take in comes from spoken words. And then only 38% comes from the tone and the voice. Okay, so that's the way we're talking, whether it's and the way and the tone of our voice. Is it high? Is it low? Is it monotone? Is it excited? Um, so not a great deal, but 55% is from our body language. Okay, 55%. We take in information from body language. So how does that work? I mean, I'm not an expert at reading body language. So for me, the way you conduct an interview when you're conducting an investigation is so important, because I genuinely believe that 90% or more of the information and evidence you're going to get, particularly in workplace investigations, okay, is going to come from interviewing people. People who are nearby, people who saw or heard anything, people who know these people, those involved in the situation. So the way you speak to them to get that information from them is absolutely key. It's absolutely key to me, because the information we're going to take in is only 7% from the spoken word and 38% from the way they talk. And that's what we're going to focus on, that 7%, because body language doesn't tell us anything. It just tells us how people are. So you can see from me, I can be quite animated in the way I talk, particularly when I'm talking about something that I'm passionate about. But that doesn't tell you anything about what I may have seen or heard. So the focus of your interview has to be on that 7%, obtaining that information from spoken word. I'm going to show you a video, and again, I apologise if the sound quality is not great. It will go on YouTube, and hopefully it'll be better if you are struggling. So you might want to turn up your volume a little bit when I play this. But this is a little video that we use here. Now, I'm going to warn you in advance. We've not got RADA trained actors on this. We've not got ex-cast members from EastEnders or Coronation Street. This is just some people in the office, and it's just a taster of a type of interviewing technique that hopefully, and I'll go into more detail, that you'll find helpful. Okay, I've seen some chat, and it appears that you didn't get the audio there, and I do apologise for that. I know there's been some problems with that in the past. Hopefully, when you call in on YouTube, you'll be able to hear it. So if I explain that was just a technique, a very open technique, okay? So it was based on cognitive interviewing, which essentially is a method of interviewing witnesses, allowing them to retrieve memory information to enable you to get much better recollection of events. And there are some key areas of this. So there's this type of interviewing technique is very open, and it usually sort of starts with things like, you know, um, and if you didn't hear it on there, so it could be I'm investigating an incident that took place on this particular day and time at this location. I understand, you were around. Can you tell me in your own words exactly what you saw or heard? And so that individual, it's an open question, and they start to recall information. The other method is to sort of say to them, okay, so explain to me, at the moment this individual walked into a room or this was said. Take your time, think about your surroundings, and in your own words, tell me what you saw around you. Who was nearby? What was the layout of the room? And another method is where you can say, okay, tell me everything you remember. What was the weather? What were you drinking? What had you done before the meeting? What had you done after? These sorts of things. And there's another aspect of it, and it's looking for someone else's perspective where you can say, okay, so you said that this person was nearby. From their perspective, what do you think they saw or heard? Would they have heard anything that was said? What do you think they saw? How did you think they interpreted it? And another way is to sort of do it in several orders, which is generally our memory sort of stores things from beginning to end as like a timeline of a story. But actually, sometimes it's better to start at the end and work backwards. Now, a lot of people think that when you're interviewing someone, they sort of go, I'm not sure. Oh, they must be lying. Actually, not necessarily the point. It could be that they're exploring their memory to find where they've stored that particular piece of information. And if you think of your brain like your laptop or your PC, you can get lots of information, and you need to search all over the place for it. So what do? You sort of set up little folders. Well, your brain is exactly the same. Uh, a part of the brain in the temporal lobe is called the hippocampus, and that's where these informations are stored. What it does is it gets short-term memory, stores it, and it doesn't store it for very long. And then what it does is it puts it into deep memory. So when people sometimes are sort of erring and umming, actually what it means is they're exploring where they've stored that piece of information. Now, this is a much better technique than sort of saying to someone, and we have another video of that, but so I won't show it, but than saying, right, well, I've had this complaint. Apparently you said this, these people were here. Why did you say it? Leading question, very sort of aggressive, confrontational. Person on the receiving end is going to become very defensive. It's not going to open up to you because they're going to consider you've already got a preconceived idea that they've said it. Doesn't really work. You're not building a rapport. So this type of interviewing technique is really important. Now, obviously, there may be some former police officers here today. You will recognize this because it's a method that's used primarily for interviewing witnesses of crimes, but actually it's just as relevant, it's just as important, and it's just as pertinent when you're conducting a workplace investigation, because most, I guarantee, of the investigations you're going to be doing are going to be around complaints of bullying, harassment of some form, and as we've just discussed earlier in the session, sexual harassment, sexual assault. So this type of interviewing technique allows people to really open up and get a lot of information across to you. And just to highlight why I'm a big advocate of this type of interviewing when conducting workplace investigations, particularly as other investigations, is that some research was conducted looking at various different types of interviewing techniques. And I won't go into it now, but I'm sure some of you may be familiar with what's called the read technique, which is the technique you see American police officers generally using on some of these cases on TV, where they're being friendly, then they're accusing them, then they're sort of saying they've got evidence they haven't. This type of technique. So this cognitive interviewing technique was measured against all these different techniques, and this particular technique was found to improve the accuracy of information by over 40%. That meant over 40% more accurate information was being drawn from the witnesses than any other interviewing technique that they tested. So it just shows you this is academic research that proves this type of interviewing technique is sound. You will get more accurate information. As an investigator, that's the key part of your investigation technique. You want to get as much accurate information from the witnesses, from the complainant, from the respondent as possible. So just wanted to highlight that as a, why I advocate this. So I'm going to move on now. I briefly touched on it at the beginning, sort of earlier in today's session, on the burden of proof. And the burden of proof is such a challenging part, particularly of a workplace investigation. So again, for anyone who's investigated criminal offences, burden of proof beyond reasonable doubt, evidence fully substantiates what you've got before you. In workplace investigations at employment tribunals and civil court, it's on the balance of probabilities. And this is a definition of balance of probabilities that I'm sure you can read, but actually I want to define it a little bit easier. The balance of probabilities states that based on the evidence you have available to you, is it more likely than not that the incident occurred? Okay. Now, a lot of people interpret this as, oh, that's very difficult because actually there was no one around, no one saw it, no one heard it. And then they go, well, then there's no evidence. So, it didn't happen. That's not what the balance of probabilities is about. And what I want to do is I just want to give you a little example in a moment, and I want to put that into the chat as a poll, and hopefully this works. So I want you to just read this slide, okay? Just read this slide. You're the investigator. You've interviewed people, you've got the complaint, you've interviewed the respondent, you've interviewed the witnesses. This is the information you have available to you as the investigator. And what you have to decide on the balance of probabilities, do you believe there is a case to answer or not? So I just want you to read that for a moment. Okay, I hope you're giving you quite a bit of time to read that. I'm just going to hopefully share something with you in a poll. Okay, so I'm hoping that this will go into. So what I want to know is from you, do you believe there is a case to answer or not? And I'm going to, hopefully that will, here we go. So hopefully you can all see that. So could you tell me, do you believe there is a case to answer or not, based on that information as an investigator? And I'll give you a little time to do that. Got a few responses. Is there anyone else? Brilliant. Thank you. Anyone else? I'll give you some time. It's quite a bit of information on a slide to take in, but okay. Okay. So Based on this evidence and applying the balance of probabilities, remember I said the balance of probabilities is not beyond all reasonable doubt. Okay, the balance of probabilities, is it more likely than not this incident occurred? So what we have here is a complaint that says an individual, Bob, touched a female member of staff, Sheila, inappropriately and asked her for a kiss. Yep, Sheila said that it happened in the kitchen and that there were 4 people nearby. Bob denies everything. Okay. Ade, one of the people who was there, didn't see Sheila or Bob in the kitchen, but does know that Bob finds Sheila attractive because he's told him on several occasions. Olu, he saw Bob and Sheila in the kitchen, but didn't see Bob touch Sheila. Tony saw Bob and Sheila in the kitchen, never heard anything, but he did see Sheila walk away from Bob and was visibly upset, and Bob returned to his desk. And Geeta says she saw Bob and Sheila and noticed Bob was close to Sheila, and then she said Sheila turned away, said something to Bob, and walked. She said Sheila was upset and had tears in her eyes. So, on the balance of probabilities, I would say there is a case to answer here. So for those 80% of you, well done. You know, it's absolutely correct. There is a case to answer here. You're probably asking why. Because although no one actually saw or heard what Bob did, there is enough corroborating evidence here to suggest it was more likely than not that something did occur. Now, remember, if you can, the slide I showed you on the balance of probabilities, it is likely you will never know the full truth. But that's not what you're there to determine. You're not there to prove guilt. You're there to establish, is it reasonable, based on the evidence you've got available to you, that this incident is more likely than not to have occurred? And in this instance, I would suggest it is. And this is a big stumbling block in workplace investigations, because not enough people feel that they have sufficient understanding of the application of the balance of probabilities. So they will automatically revert to beyond reasonable doubt. Well, actually, I haven't got anything. No one saw it. No one heard it. So it didn't happen. Often referred to as he said, she said. Okay. I don't like that term, but that's often what you'll find it's referred to. One version of events against another person's version of events does not mean that you cannot find a case to answer. Okay. So I hope that sort of emphasised that and got that across to you, because this really is a key point. A number of cases, in fact, a number of investigations do fall when they're at an employment tribunal, when the employment tribunal say actually the application of balance probabilities was not correctly applied. There was evidence that said this did occur. There was evidence that suggested this might have happened. Okay. So if we move on. So in terms of investigations, there's some little tips. And I've broken this down into 3 stages of an investigation. The first one is around your planning. And I haven't touched on it here, but understanding what you are investigating is key for an investigator. And these are your terms of reference. What is it you're asking me to investigate? Okay. Who are the people who are involved? What potential witnesses are you aware of before you begin interviewing people? Because obviously we all know you can interview some of those witnesses and they lead on to other witnesses that you may not initially know. And then you need to consider the evidence that you need that's available beforehand. And when I say that, and I'll just touch on this, one of the key things, the most important pieces of evidence, if it is available, that you obtain immediately or as soon as you can, is video, digital evidence, CCTV in particular. Recordings of telephone conversations, which some organisations do, particularly if it's a safety critical organisation. So I worked in London Underground, and a lot of the communications that went on regarding train operations, for example, was considered safety critical, and that was recorded and kept for a period of time. It's important you understand the timescales that evidence is kept for. Okay, because it could be very detrimental if you delay, don't understand, you need that information, and then suddenly that information is not available to you. So identifying the evidence early is key. And then obtaining all that evidence swiftly, as I just said, and conducting interviews promptly. Our memory does erode over time. Now, the cognitive interviewing technique, as I said earlier, is very good at memory retrieval and very accurate. But that doesn't mean our memories are not eroded over time, and they are. And sometimes, if you've heard of co-witnessing, which is another aspect of cognitive behavior and memory, co-witnessing, where I might have a version of events, and that's my version, and I might have another witness who is nearby. And sometimes, if you're interviewed together, one of us is going to be a stronger character, and we might challenge that person's version of events, and then suddenly being a less forceful character, or probably not being confident in my memory, suddenly leaning more towards the other person's version of events, which is often why you'll find, in particularly in criminal investigations, witnesses are interviewed separately, so that there isn't that cross tainting of memory recollection. And the next part is analysis and findings. Now, analysing all your evidence, analysing all your witness testimony, all your evidence, your witness statements, and then coming up with a very clear, rational outcome decision, evidence-based, but on the balanced probabilities, okay, as I've just discussed. But often, and this is, I want to just touch on now something that often we find that you might get a number of complaints. And you might suddenly find yourself overwhelmed with complaints from individuals, sometimes predominantly in the same team. And they may be about the same person, but then again, they may not. They may be about one or two people. But you're getting all these different complaints from different areas. And to do them individually as an individual investigation, all it's going to do is take more time. It's going to probably not really fully understand, well, hang on a second, why am I suddenly receiving numerous complaints from the same team or the same department, or a group of individuals about the same team or department or individuals? Because, sometimes you're not going to get to that root cause. So you may decide, actually, what we need to do is understand the root cause. And understanding the root cause is really key for those when you've got volumes of complaints, because, and I like this from Vincent van Gogh, apparently, success is sometimes the outcome of a whole string of failures. When you're receiving complaints, something has failed, something has gone seriously wrong. Okay, whether that's communication, generally it's communication with individuals. No one's really spoke up, or there's been this dripping tap effect, where there's been a number of little things that have accumulated to a point where someone has felt the need to come forward and sort of complain about behaviours. But sometimes, you need to understand, well, what went wrong so that it doesn't go wrong again. And that's where I believe in what we call independent reviews, which is essentially an audit, an audit of your organization, to say, okay, we're receiving a number of complaints, a volume of complaints. Okay, they're all related to the same people, the same team, the same department, or the same issue, whether that's bullying, harassment, workload, stress, whatever it may be. An independent review basically is a less formal approach to an investigation. And what its intention is to be a confidential process of allowing those people to speak freely, openly, sharing what the issues really are, okay, in the safe knowledge that their details are not going to be given. They're not going to be used as they would be in an investigation. So in an investigation, you would conduct witness interviews, you take the names of those individuals, you would detail which witnesses have been spoken to, particularly when you're going into, if potentially, a formal disciplinary process where that information may need to be disclosed to the respondent, because they have a right to defend their case and present their case. This is not like that. This is actually, well, there's not going to be any blame apportioned. We're trying to understand what's gone wrong. Okay. And that's where we say an independent review becomes very useful. And again, it's a very simple process. You identify all the complaints you've received. Okay. And you think, okay, who do I need to speak to? How am I going to engage with people? Now, we did this recently for an organization, and what we did was we said, okay, it was a diverse workforce. So we decided, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to offer drop-in sessions, one-to-one drop-in sessions. So we go on site, we book a room and say, invite anyone's welcome to come in and speak to us, have a little chat with us. We're also going to offer one-to-one virtual calls for those people who may not feel comfortable going into the office to see that they're talking to people about things. And then we're also going to say, okay, or we'll send you the questionnaire. So you've got a questionnaire. You ask everyone the same sorts of questions. Okay, so you're getting some consistency that you can benchmark and understand what's going on. And then you go out, you identify your target audience, and you say, okay, let's talk to them. Let's speak to them. Reassure them this is confidential. Don't take their names. Say, okay, tell me what goes on. And you're asking this script of questions, and then you obviously give them the option to share anything else with you. And then what you do is you're collating all that. And for anyone who's done anything in terms of root cause analysis, that's where this comes in. You're collating that information. You go, okay, so this is what the problem is. Okay, why? And then why? So investigations, you've got the four whys and the how, and in root cause analysis, you've got the five W's, which is called why, 5 whys. And you're doing that until you get to the root cause of, okay, now we understand what's causing this. And it could be a number of things. It could be uncertainty around change. It could be miscommunication or a lack of communication, or it could be poor leadership. It could be that actually people just are not skilled or competent or experienced or trained in how to lead. And then actually what you find is, okay, so together you then draw this action plan. And then you share them with the group. Okay, we've done this survey. We've done this independent review. We've identified there's some themes in terms of culture or behaviors or training that we need to address, okay, based upon these complaints. Now, that's not to say, by the way, that if serious allegations come out of this, you can't conduct a formal investigation. But what it does mean is you're displaying to your team, actually, we're taking your complaint seriously. We're trying to understand what's at the cause of it, and we're going to put an action plan in place. And acting is key because action changes things. If you do not act, things don't change. And that's the key part of this independent review. That actually, once you've got the action plan, once you've identified what the root cause is, and you've identified, well, okay, what are the solutions? Having engaged with all your team, all these people that are involved, you need to act. And it's all based on trust, honesty, and respect. Okay. It's about you trusting. It's about gaining trust from your team that you're taking their concerns seriously, that you're allowing them to be honest with you and respecting their views and taking them on board and actually dealing with them. And I'm just going to end on this. I had to put Sherlock Holmes in. It was just had to be done. But what I'm trying to say here is don't prejudge. Don't prejudge. As an investigator, whether you're doing investigation or if your organization does things like independent reviews or internal audits, never judge. Not before you've got the facts. Because what often happens, and I talked about this earlier, about this read technique, that sometimes we make a decision. We take a view based on our bias, okay, which we all have. We'll prejudge something before we've got any evidence that supports our thought processes. And if we do that, what we often tend to do is we'll then get all the evidence, but we will make the evidence fit our perception of what took place, what we believe took place. And actually what we should be doing is going in with this open mind, and we should be saying, okay, tell me what happened. Where's the evidence? Openly looking at that objectively and saying, okay, this is what took place. So I think this phrase, as cheesy as it is, is actually very relevant to the role of an investigator and the way we conduct investigations and the way we interact with people. So that's the session, and obviously I'm going to do a little run through here because we do independent reviews, and obviously we provide investigation services to a number of clients. We also do investigation and disciplinary and grievance hearing training, and that's what we do. I just want to say, obviously, thank you for joining today. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy calendars to listen to me go on about investigations. I hope you realise how passionate I am about making sure they're done correctly and fairly and objectively. And I do some talks on bias, and I do some talks more in depth on cognitive interviewing. But if you're interested, or if there's anything we can help with, or if you just want to know more about us, these are our contact details. You can contact me directly, where it's our email address on there, inquiries@lexan-group.co.uk. Just put Gary in front of it and it'll come through directly to me. So as I said, thank you very much for joining me today. I genuinely appreciate you all taking time out. Today's recording, once downloaded, we will get it up on our YouTube channel. So, unfortunately, I know some of you may not have heard the interview video. Hopefully when it's loaded up, you can listen to that. As I said, they're not ex cast members of EastEnders, so bear with it, but it's just a taster of how a cognitive interview would be undertaken to get information. And again, if there's anything at all that we can help with, do get in touch with me. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find Lexan Corporate Services on LinkedIn. So I just want to say thanks again. I've hope you found the session useful. Even those of you who are experienced investigators, if you just learned something different or understood something a little bit differently, then it's achieved what I really wanted to set out to achieve. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the very best of an enjoyable week. Hopefully the weather stays nice and bright. But thanks again, and take care.